Great. So welcome to the February 14th Policy Committee meeting of the Radnor Township School District. And we are going to get underway with administrative remarks, but I'd like to first welcome Andrew Lord, our new student representative, and welcome back Andrea McManaman, our teacher representative. So welcome. Dr. Stevenson, Mr. Robarczyk.
Good afternoon. Thank you for welcoming Andrew Lord, who's our student rep who will be our student rep for the remainder of this this school year. Welcome, Andrew, and we welcome your input and student voice. You will, if you look at our district's website, you will see that the committee's goals are up and outlined on under the committee's section on the website. Tonight we will have three policies to discuss. Wanted to just point out one of the things that we talked about earlier meetings about ARs is that we would get summaries and ARs during our administrative remarks, but because of policy 204, we made substantial changes of shifting from policy to AR. Those will be done during our discussion tonight. Mr. Robarczyk.
Just a quick comment in regards to policy 826 that was passed. How long ago was that, Susan?
August.
In August. The incorrect version is up on the website, and there are just minor grammatical corrections that need to be made to the final version. That will get it posted up on the website as soon as possible.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to take public comment before we approve the minutes. Do we have any public comment tonight? And as per our new policy, members of the public have signed in at the book, and we welcome your comments for 4 minutes. Welcome, Mrs. Spurtle.
Thank you. Good evening. Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace. Just a quick question, since we just finished a little earlier the GRCC committee meeting. They were going to review or present to the policy committee meeting policy number 232, student involvement in decision making, and I'm wondering if that has been brought forward yet to the policy committee. And then also there was a question that came from a regular public participant who's not here. That's Ms. Sherry, as to whether there will be a policy written on the parking spaces and any donations that are made to the special foundations and nonprofits that the 3 spaces go to. Will there be a special policy written for that in the future? Going to what's being covered tonight, policy number 005, just a quick an eyeballing the purpose. I believe there should be an S added to the word committees at the end of that paragraph, so it will read correctly.
Could you repeat what you just said?
The purpose for 005. It reads, establish process for the election of officers and give authority to the board to make appointments, adopt resolutions, and establish board committees.
Yep, thank you.
On page 3 of 5 for policy 005, I had a question on the board committees. And in the explanation, it said members of the board will be assigned by the president to various committees. Committees will assist the board in the conduct of its affairs and may conduct studies, make recommendations, and act in an advisory capacity. In that paragraph, the following paragraph says, when specifically charged to do so by the board, committees shall conduct studies. Now, are those both the same meaning being repeated? That was my question. Different because it's direction from the board. And then the other, having been introduced to the new student representative, on the last page, although it says 4 or 5, just maybe a further explanation that they will assign a student representative to serve on the committee for a period of 1 year to define that year, because there's been some changes in. Thank you. Sorry, I don't mean to critical.
Can I respond to that last piece real quick? In regards to the student representatives and teacher representatives, that's something that was added, so we are going to be discussing that tonight.
Okay,
So will be clarification in language.
thank you. On the AR, I thank Dr. Stevenson for bringing up the, because there's a long AR here, and that will be approved, I understand, even though ARs are not by this committee to be presented to the board.
The policy is going to be approved.
The policy
We're-
will, not the AR that
The
will
AR
be
is going to be a
discussed.
part, the reason why we're discussing is because it's substantiate changes explaining why we shifted to the AR.
Okay, thank you. In the unexcused absence, just a quick unexcused absence. The absence of a student for any reason that does not qualify as an excused absent, as listed above when they're no longer listed above. And just a quick note that there's a couple paragraphs on charter schools, which was interesting, but does not pertain, and it appears in our AR for Radnor Township, whether that is something that needs to be included or not. It was of interest, but, and then the local board procedures policy, which was very comprehensive. Just a couple questions on the monitoring of results throughout the year by the board on page 4 of 6. On number 3, evaluating its own performance. This is the board evaluating its own. How exactly will you be doing that? And also number 5, reviewing effectiveness, which I thought was very good, of the comprehensive plan. Is there a schedule that will be set up for that review to make sure that the review is done throughout the year? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further public comment? Welcome, Dr. Winters.
Good evening. I just want to commend this committee for taking into account the discussion at the January policy meeting regarding local board procedures number 011. I'm specifically pleased that you've noted the importance of encouraging members of the public to participate in board meetings, and also including language that I think will promote perhaps more civil discourse, not only between the public and members of the board, but also among board members themselves, which can sometimes be a little bit uncomfortable for those in the audience to watch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All righty. So with that, I'd like to have any comments or feedback on the approval of the minutes.
I had one quick question on the minutes, and that is where we are talking, and this probably should have been brought up during administrative remarks, but when number 4, where we're talking about ARs, we'll summarize and update the policy committee on any changes to an AR. Would it be reasonable to also give us an update as to the status of a particular AR being developed, so that we just know if it's about to be finished, if it's been started, that kind of thing, in addition to anything that is an update on it, as opposed to just a change?
Yes, not just when there's revisions. We can tell you when there's a newly developed AR as well.
Okay. Would that be all right with
Well,
you?
I mean, I think what's accurate, the minutes accurately
Right,
reflect what
right.
Dr. Stevenson said.
Right.
This is a follow-up question, is
It
what
is.
you're saying.
That's why I said I probably should have brought it up during
Great.
administrative remarks, but I was just asking if, since the minutes had it in there, it reminded me that I had wanted to ask if we could be updated as to AR status.
I'm not sure that I know what you mean by status. Can you just clarify?
So, we're waiting on a few ARs to be developed, and I don't, aside from just reaching out and asking offline, are they ready or not? I was just wondering if it would be reasonable to have that brought to the board and say, at one point, didn't you have a list, Dr. Stevenson, of ARs that you guys were working on? So maybe just knowing how those are going along is helpful to us, not that we're going to see them or review them, but just to know how that list is going. Does that make sense?
You know what, I understand your question now. Thank you for clarifying. What I'd like to do is discuss that in a policy planning meeting with Julia and with the administrators, because what I'd like to have an offline conversation about that and make sure that it doesn't become a task that becomes a burdensome task. Not that an update isn't important, but I'd like to be able to have an opportunity to discuss that offline with them, if that's okay? And then we can get back, give an update on that next month. Archie Stevenson, does that work? Julia, you're good with that?
Yes.
Great, super. Did we have any other comments on the minutes?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
So then let's get underway. Thank you.
Okay, we're taking a look at policy 005, the local board procedures. And it's been noted already, obviously, I missed the yes on the committees there and the purpose, opening paragraph. But besides that, it was the new language at the, and also on page 3 of 5, that was meant to be taken out, the very last paragraph where specifically charged to do so by the board, committee shall conduct studies, so on. That will be stricken from this policy because we already have it. But section 7 and 8 are the two new pieces to this policy that indicates how teacher representatives are appointed to each of the committees as well as student representatives in section 8.
Right, so I'd like to do, thank you for making the change on the beginning of page 1. I appreciate that. You know, we did pick up that because we added the more specific information about the definition of what a board committee, you know, creating board committees, that last paragraph is just duplicate, so that will be struck for the first read. And then before we get into a quick conversation about section 7 and 8,
Yes.
I'd just like to get any feedback kind of up to that point on the policy, if either Amy or Julia have anything else before we move forward on 7 and 8.
It's non-substantive, but I'd like to be consistent whether we talk about board members or school directors.
I had the same.
I don't care either way, although I would guess that, I think we usually say school directors throughout the entire, all the rest of the policy, so it might be easier for the sake of consistency to go that way, but I really don't care.
Yeah, this is something that from the 2008, the massive adoption of PSBA policies, it was school directors as in the rest of those in the 2008 series, but we can go with board members. We kind of looked at this and we didn't feel as though there was any change to the substance, whether it was school directors or board members.
It doesn't change the substance. It is just an issue of consistency, like you were saying.
Yeah. We can go with school board members as it starts with within the first paragraph.
So I'm okay with that. The only question I have about that, Mike, is that there are certain policies we have where the wording is lifted basically directly from school code, and the terminology school director is used in school code. So is it problematic if we change that wording on our own to board members because it's just referencing school code? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's as long as the use is consistent. You can use board member or school director. Either phrase means the same thing.
Right.
So it doesn't really matter. I mean, the law says what it says, and you can't obviously change that through policy. But as long as you refer to it consistently, it doesn't really make any difference.
Okay. I mean, I'm okay with the consistent sake. Appreciate the comment. And I'm fine that as we go through policies, if we want to change over the terminology to board member.
Hereafter, I will make note of board members compared
I'm
to school
fine with that.
directors.
I don't want that to become a crazy task where we go looking for it everywhere in the policies. I don't think that's realistic. But as we come across the terminology,
Correct.
is I think what you're saying, right? Yeah, great, super.
Yep.
Is there anything else for you, Julia?
Just some tweaking in section 7 and section 8.
Okay, so I'd like to get to those in a minute because I know that Amy has a couple of other things before that, right?
Yes, and to follow up on what Julia said, for what it's worth, 006 that we just redid, we use the term board members, capital B, small m for members. So if we want to be consistent with one of the most recent policies we've passed, I just wanted to point that out. In this policy, board members is used on page 1, and then page 2, it's school directors, and page 3, it's back. So
Right, we'll go
we would
back
fix
to-
that.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other things that I found in the policy, the purpose, I appreciate the purpose. I was wondering if, in reading the purpose, and again, it could have just been my lack of understanding, I struggled a little bit with the way the purpose was laid out, and I wanted to propose an alternative that's more concise, if that would be okay, that I think says the same thing, but in fewer words. So I just wanted to offer that up for some feedback. And the purpose, the way I would read it, is this policy is intended to facilitate the annual structure and organization of the board, period. Because with some of the additional words in there, like establish process for the election of officers and give the board authority, I mean, we do cover those things, but one of the things in there, the current purpose says adopt resolutions, and we adopt resolutions at times other than our organizational meeting. And as I read this policy, and I could be wrong, it seemed to me that it focused pretty much on our organizing ourselves on an annual basis. So I thought that one all-encapsulating sentence would be, this policy is intended to facilitate the annual structure and organization of the school board. Just a suggestion. Far be it from me
I'll
to.
ask the rest of the committee
Yeah.
if they have an opinion.
Julia, do you have a thought?
Could you read your wording?
This policy is intended to facilitate the annual structure and organization of the school board.
Do you want to say the annual restructuring? Because it's not an annual structure. Do you know what I'm saying? I hate to be pedantic, but I think that's really the thrust of it. It's
Well,
reorganizing.
I actually would have just left out the word annual because within the policy, first of all, I appreciate the shorter wording. Well done.
Okay,
But
that's what I say less.
in the policy itself, it addresses that certain things we do annually, certain things we do every 4 years, certain things we have to do, just whenever they occur. So I would have just said the structure and organization of the school board, period. And there are specific strategy, certain sections that address all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, they all come down to the structure and organization of our board.
What's the difference between structure and organization?
So the structure is that we will have officers and board committees. The organization is the that annually we will do it and create a treasurer and a secretary, and that we will be organized in the month, shortly right after we're elected, and elect a vice president. The structure is that we could have committees, that we have officers, and that there's an order to our order to our organization.
So structure's static, and it's really reorganization.
Yeah, I believe you're probably right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's probably right. We do call it a reorg, actually. We don't call it an
I was gonna say, it's the
organizational meeting.
reorganization
So, yeah,
in December.
do you have a thought on that, Mike Christofko?
No, the school code does refer to it as a reorganization meeting.
Oh, well, then, why don't we do that? The structure and reorganization of the school board. Are we okay with that? Shorter? Great, super.
So this policy is intended to facilitate the structure and reorganization of the school board.
Great. Okay. Did you have other?
Yes.
okay.
So I just wanted to point out again in section 1, board members, small m.
Yep.
I was wondering if in section 2, organization meeting should be capitalized because it was referred to that in section number 1. I don't know.
What?
Just food for thought.
Oh.
Okay. Don't know, just want to point that out.
Now I would actually say the reorganization meeting is actually
I
what
was
it
gonna
should
say
say.
it should be
Well,
If
should the
that's what the
policy be called reorganization then?
Perhaps, if that's what the school code calls it, Mike? Is that what you're telling us?
Well, it's referred to as a reorganization meeting. The school code might actually just say that you're required to organize during the first week of December of every year. I'd have to actually take a look at the exact language.
That is correct, though. It is, because I've looked at it. It is the organization in the first week of December. And then when you look at other districts from the Commonwealth and other states, it is just as noted as organization.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I think everybody refers to it as a reorganization meeting because you have been organized up until that point in time, and it's basically, is a reorganization, but I think the school code actually does use the phrase
Organization.
organized during the first week of
December.
Oh, well, then let's leave it and be consistent with school code. Yeah.
Organization then, okay.
Yep.
Okay. For C, number 3C, under officers, where the sentence says vacancies in any office shall be filled by board election. I was wondering if there is a specific process for board election that needs to be spelled out anywhere? How would that happen? How does that happen?
Those offices are talking just about the treasurer and the, aren't those just,
Those, okay.
those are just talking about the treasurer and the secretary, correct?
Of the appointments that are, and you can do all of the rest of those, which are in section 4. But
Okay, maybe I was misunderstanding and thinking it meant a board member's seat. a
No,
vacancy.
Those are
the
officers.
appointments of these
Okay.
individuals, yeah.
The officers are the president and vice president.
Well, just for another time, just curious if there is a board vacancy. Is that in one of our policies, what we do under those circumstances?
That's covered by.
That's completely different. If there's
Yeah.
a board vacancy, you have a certain period of time in which the board can appoint somebody. Everything has to be in public, all the interviews and everything. And if you don't fill it within that period of time, then, the common pleas court could step in and fill it.
Okay. All right, so my misunderstanding on that one, sorry about that. On section 4, where it says a tax collector is not elected to collect taxes, there are commas in there, and I'm just not sure if we needed them. It's, again, tiny little thing. And 4B, next to members of the school authority, comma, just a space is missing before, if applicable. The section 5 resolutions, the board may adopt resolutions during the organization meeting. I just think it should be consistent, capital M, if that's how we're referring to an organization meeting. And the resolutions that we may do, I know it says may adopt. I'm just wondering, are these things that we do differently perhaps because the normal day, place, and time for regular business meetings, I believe we sign off on at a business meeting at some point during the year. So maybe I'm misunderstanding the statement here, but I know that we go towards the end of the school year out and put a calendar of board business meetings up on the agenda to be approved. So I'm just wondering if I know this was originally made a PSBA policy, but I'm wondering if we don't do it exactly as we're saying it in
The A through D, you're saying? Is that
5C.
5C.
What about it?
Those are all part of the school code, so that's why I had included.
And this is saying you may do these things.
Right.
So at the reorganization meeting, which gives the board the authority to do things at the reorganization meeting other than just reorganize, because
Right, okay.
there isn't supposed to be any other business conducted at the reorganization meeting. So this policy allows you to do certain basic things at that meeting in addition to just reorganizing. And some of them are deal with things like, for example, the depositories. That's something that's typically done because the signatories change often. As far as who the officers are and so forth. So that's something that makes sense to do at that
Right.
particular meeting. So this is just the things that you would have the right to do at the reorganization meeting if you wanted to. It's not requiring you to do it then. You could do it at another time, just as long as it would be done annually.
Okay, so what it's saying here is representative of what we do at a business meeting at the end of the year right now, where the board committee meetings are put together for the upcoming school year, and it's passed on the consent agenda usually for the business meeting. That's essentially what it's saying we may do at an organization meeting instead. Is that correct? Am I understanding that wording properly?
Yes.
Okay. Section 6, somebody already brought that up, that there's a redundant paragraph there. Again, at the top of page 4, this one, I again, could have just been my difficulty interpreting it, but it says a member may request or refuse appointment to a committee. Refusal to serve as any one committee member shall not be grounds for failure to appoint a member as another committee member. I was wondering, I want to offer proposed language that for me was a little bit clearer, but may I leave it up to the committee to decide. And for me, it sounded clearer to say, a member may request or refuse appointment to a committee, the same. Refusal by a board member to serve as a member of a particular committee shall not be grounds for failure to appoint that member to another committee. That was the wording that,
Could you say
unless
that
I'm
last-
misunderstanding what the
Could you say that
meaning
one
of
more
that
time,
is.
so I can
Sure. Refusal by a board member to serve as a member of a particular committee, a member of a particular committee shall not be grounds for failure to appoint that member to another committee. Unless I'm misunderstanding, that to me was a little bit clearer way of saying what I thought I was reading in that paragraph. Just a suggestion.
Any board member who serves as a member of a particular committee shall not be grounds for failure to appoint that member to another committee.
Are you okay with that?
I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with it too. That's fine.
Okay. I only have a couple more things here. And I'm going to stop at section 7 and 8 because I know Julia wanted to go back
No,
and make
go
some
ahead,
comments.
just keep going.
Okay. Each board committee meeting shall be convened by a chairperson who shall report on the meeting to the full board. Is it necessary to say if the chairperson is not present, the vice chair shall convene the meeting?
What?
It's to report it.
No, it's
I'm
not,
sorry.
because if the
Okay.
chairperson's not there, the chair is the chair. We say that somewhere else in a different policy.
We do.
Yep.
Okay. Cross that one out. In terms of section 7, what I noticed was, and maybe it's on purpose, but I just was hoping for some clarity, the board president will determine which of the committees have teacher reps, but when it comes to student reps, the board president is just going to make a recommendation as opposed to determining. So whether or not a student serves as opposed to a teacher serves. So that might have been by design, but if it's not, I just wanted to see which way we prefer to go.
The language should be that it's the board president will assign which committees. It's the high school. We just need to change the two words, recommendation and assign. It's the high school principal will make the recommendations to the board president who should serve on the board, but it's the board president who makes the permanent assignment.
Right, no, I get that. I'm just saying that whether or not a committee has a teacher rep or a student rep, when it comes to determining whether a committee has a teacher rep, it says for section 7, the board president will determine which committee. So that's very finite. Like the president says, yes, we're having a teacher rep on XYZ committees. But in section 8, it says the board president, when it comes to student reps, will make recommendations. And that to me is not as definitive as
So we can make it consistent by.
So which way do we want to go with that, or
I
is
think
it
it was
supposed
the
to be
board
like?
president will determine which of the committees will have a student
So
representative assigned.
the
it
authority lies
consistent with the
entirely
teacher
with the
and-
board president.
That is correct. That was my understanding.
Okay, so we would change it to will determine for both then. Is that what you're thinking? Does that make sense? What
Mike,
I'm-
it's accurate that the board president makes, I thought in one case, the board president makes the determination, and in the case of the students, I actually technically thought it was the superintendent. I thought it was a different policy that covered student reps, but I could be mistaken about that.
That's completely up to your discretion as to how you want to handle that.
Okay, so that piece is. All right, so let's put a pin in your comment for now and hear Julia's, and see
I
if
had
the.
one more
Okay.
thing. Do you want me to?
Yeah, no, that's fine, but before we make a determination of wording, I want to hear Julia's comments.
Okay. And the last thing that I have regarding the student representative, Section 8, is a question of whether or not we should refer to Policy 232, because it's my understanding that that is one of the ARs that's being developed that will spell out the timing of the student appointments, the selection process, and all those other things. So referencing that policy might be a good thing to do, the AR for that policy, I guess.
I'll look into that.
Great.
as well.
Okay.
Okay, Julia, what were your thoughts?
Basically the same thing that Amy said. I wanted both sections to mirror the language. And I do think that the first paragraph is a little more succinct, so I'd go that way.
So then in the case of both student representatives and teacher representatives, the first sentence will read, the board president will determine which of the committees will have a student and a teacher representative assigned. We're going to keep that sentence consistent for both, Tony. Is that good?
Correct.
With regard to teacher representatives, and we did have this conversation as part of our planning meeting, RTEA will then recommend annually an individual to serve as the teacher representative on each identified committee. That's how we're leaving that.
Right.
With regard to the student representative, we're going to, how do we want to change that wording? Dr. Stevenson, you seem to have some feedback on that.
No, it could be consistency. Principal is recommending, we can still say that, just like RTA, that he will recommend, or she would recommend annually a student to serve as student representative to serve on it. That makes it consistent.
Yeah.
Okay, and the reason that we left, the reason that the wording is particular to the period of 1 year for the student rep, because I think this question did come up, kind of floated around, is that, RTA will decide amongst themselves in their union how they would like to handle that. It's possible because teachers stay for many years. This same teacher could potentially serve on a committee for a number of years, but RTEA will make that recommendation annually, and we want to leave that to your union to work through that. That feels good to you?
Yep.
Great, super. With regard to Andrew, students graduate. I mean, that we want them to graduate, actually. That's our intention here in the school district. So, and I believe, Andrew, part of the reason you're taking over is that, as generally happens with seniors, about this time of year, they have other things on their mind. And so I'm fine with the specifics of that being spelled out in 232. Is that that's what we're saying here, right?
Right, so what I would propose, if it sounds good to the committee, is that we take off for a period of 1 year, because the AR for 232 is going to be much more specific. It's going to say, for example, when they start and stop, because there's a cycle being determined. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Stevenson, but isn't the work being done at the high school with the student government committee and the administration there to figure out what grades they're in? Juniors serve in this capacity, seniors can do this role, this is when the election will take place, this is when they'll serve. All that's going to be outlined in the AR, so we may not need to refer to a time here because it's going to be in the AR.
So can I just get clarification? So we're saying the high school principal will then recommend annually?
Yes.
Minus the
And that's different from our discussions that they assign, the high school principal assigns the person.
Well, yeah,
It does either way, okay.
Yeah, it says, recommend.
Just wanna make sure.
Just want to make it consistent.
Yep.
And Amy, to your point, I think that ending that sentence at committee is fine, because it's going to be spelled out in 232. And Tony, and Amy makes a good point. Let's just do a cross-reference of 232 there, because it will be spelled out, or at the bottom where you have it, before.
Okay.
Great.
Thank
So, assuming that those changes all come through the way we're intending, are we, the three of us, comfortable with putting this forth for a first read at the February board meeting?
I am.
Yes?
I am.
Super.
You only have 2 people to check with today.
And on we move. All right, so now we're on to 204,
Instead of 4.
attendance. And Dr. Stevenson, you're going to cover that one. Great.
Yes. Like I said earlier in the administrative remarks, the policy 204, attendance, the reason why we are bringing this forward is because of Act 138, in which Governor Wood signed into law in November, which made some changes to policy about attendance and the law about attendance. And in making these particular changes, it was determined that it makes more sense to make these changes in the AR, and the reason why they make those changes in the AR is because that there are, number one, there are constant changes involved in how we are looking at attendance across the board, and the language moving also future revisions based on this change of law does not require us to formally go through successive rounds of board approval. These internal procedures to be followed, ensuring the tracking, report, and students' attendance is better suited for the AR, because that way when there's a need to make particular changes internally, we can do so. This does not take away from the procedures of Act of the act that Governor Wolf passed. Let me also say that number one is that our district is fortunate that we don't deal with a major attendance problem. For example, we've only had refer one student this year in district-wide for truancy court. We've also have already had some of these outlined measures that the governor putting forth. We've already had them in place. For instance, one of the things that was put in place was that we had to have an intervention plan before we could go to court. My district already had a truancy elimination plan already in place. The added pieces to this that are added to this this act that are important is that we need to make sure that number one is that we have a plan in place, which, like I said, we do. Number two is that we give proper notification to parents, which we do first notice and second notices that we've already had in place. And the third one that is a major one that impacts our district, which was brought up about charter schools. Before this act was passed, it was the requirement of the district, the home district, to be responsible for students who attended charter schools but are residents in the district. This is no longer going to be a part of the charter schools. Will be independently responsible for their students as we move forward. This act does not take place until September. However, we thought that it would be important that we brought it before the board now for discussion because to make changes. I will say that this was vetted by our school-based administrators, so we made changes to make sure that they were comfortable with the language to move forward.
All right, so I'd like to do this in kind of two stages to make sure that we cover what I think is most important, which is this policy needs to move forward as a first read.
Yes.
Because then the administration has the board direction it needs to continue to work on an AR.
Yes.
And I appreciate the perspective, and I think that it's probably the appropriate way to handle it. The one question I have about 204 is in the left-hand column, we no longer have what the authority or law is. So,
Act 138, right?
so I just wanted to ask you, Dr. Stevenson, if you could make sure that in that column for first read, we have whatever school code, including the changes that Act 138 brought forth, that give us the authority to deal with attendance for students. And then, you know, the large bulk of this particular policy is actually a deletion, so it should be a pretty easy conversation for us to just move forward on a first read. So as long as, you know, there's, in deleting School Code 1301 and Title 22, there's probably still some of the authority for attendance, and then there was a change in law, Act 132, 138. So, you know, if we can get that into the left-hand column, you know, I'd like to ask us, you're comfortable moving forward for a first read?
Yes.
Great. Julia?
Yes, just one question.
Sure.
I'm assuming that the delegation of responsibility in the left hand refers to the right, the board directs the superintendent, that new part?
Yes.
So if that just aligns.
We'll just line
Yes.
up the authority.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Right.
No problems.
Great.
There is one thing, and I don't know if this is a statement around the policy or the AR, but it's just a question that came to mind, is any of this going to impact the attendance sections of our school handbooks?
Not for the remainder of the year.
Okay.
So, and again, this is why we didn't want it to, it doesn't go into effect until September. However, so these are, that's why I said we're fortunate that we are not dealing with a massive, you know, needed to implement it now. And we're also very fortunate that we've worked on this the past year. We had an attendance committee work on it last year, and which made changes. And it's a lot of this was reflective. The only thing that's not reflective in here is the charter school, which is we would continue anyway. So it won't change anything in the handbook until September.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so, yes, we're going to line up the delegation, great. And, you know, I don't think there's much to talk about with the policy itself. So we're good for a first read?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So, Dr. Stevenson, you have what you need there. This is a rather large AR. I do not think, you know, although evidence would indicate otherwise, we don't normally get into the details of an AR for so many reasons, it's hard to say. But I don't know if anyone here has any high-level questions or thoughts about the AR, just because it does bring about some, it is as a result of some change in law. Dr. Stevenson, I do have a question about the language in here. You're saying the charter school language will go away because it's no longer our authority?
No, the language will stay in there. I was just pointing out that up until now we are responsible as a school district. I was talking about the Act changes our responsibility for monitoring and referring students to court if they're attending a charter school. That now is the authority of and responsibility of the charter school.
Thank goodness. Okay, so do we have any major questions, thoughts about the AR without really getting into it very deeply?
I see things that need to be changed on it, but I don't think they're almost in the area of typos, like extra wording that clearly shouldn't be there. I think it should be an offline discussion.
I agree. That's why I'm just saying if there's anything high level, very high level.
No, just that one thing that was brought up in public comment.
Oh, right, yes. So, but I agree with Julia. Let's do that offline. Andrew, do you have any thoughts on this? Andrew? Okay. The only other thing, and I don't want to talk about the AR, is that Julia and I both got talking about this. It would be great in the world of electronics if down the road our district had the ability to log into Hack and do some of these absences electronically. Because parents have a specific sign-in. It's just more of a commentary than anything else.
It's a work in progress.
Yep.
It's a step-by-step. I think we've done a woman's job across the board, particularly elementary schools. I visited each one the last month. They hold monthly attendance meetings, and it's an impressive group of folks from the principal, the social worker, the guidance counselor, members of teacher representatives who talk about each kid who's under their radar. This is new for them. I mean, they've done it, but to have this process and the electronic piece is to improve it more is definitely on our agenda. So,
Great.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're ready to move on with policy 11.
Okay, 011. As we know, there were some changes to this in regards to some wording, very minor. We moved a couple things around from section F and added them to section, now if I can remember,
B, I believe.
was it B? Yes. Section B. To make that language consistent. And then I know there was just a couple questions in regards to the, talking about the purpose a little bit. If there was any language change that was recommended for that piece.
Okay.
And we did strike the strategic plan, the strategic part of the plans in here, and just left with comprehensive, since that is going to be our document that we are, that's guiding the district with its goals.
So, Amy, I don't know if you have some comments that you'd like to bring forth. I do have one question on the first page. Is that a transposition of its Principles for Governance and Leadership 2105? We're not that forward-thinking. It is 2015, correct?
15.
Okay. I know that, I think you have some feedback, or Julia, do you have feedback?
Globally, lowercase c in comprehensive, unless we're talking about the comprehensive plan. And then I'm skipping to, I'm looking at page 4 of 6 in the red line.
Okay.
It is under D. And I don't want you to think I'm trying to be difficult and revisit what we talked about last week that I was voted down on, and I accept that. But I've talked to Dave about it, and he had a suggestion that I'd like to bring up. And as you may recall, my concern was that we were tying everything we did to the comprehensive plan. I was concerned that the comprehensive plan might backfire, it might be too narrow, and I believe Roberta Winters even brought up an example of how this comprehensive plan could get us in trouble. So with that background, I was considering maybe the language of where it says setting annual goals. Instead of saying setting annual goals that are aligned with the comprehensive plan, saying setting annual goals that complement the comprehensive plan. And underneath that, where it says linking board actions to the comprehensive plan, I suggest taking board actions that complement the comprehensive plan.
Can you just repeat that one again, Julie?
Sure. Taking board
For
actions.
what number, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, it's D3.
For D3, okay. So instead of linking, for actions, okay.
Okay. Was that your only comment on the policy, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a second. First of all, Tony, in number 1,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But this actually spits out the goal for us. So is that. I'm sorry. I'm just making a comment to Ken. The comprehensive plan, when you put it in through the system, through the state and everything, it actually it produces goals for you as well. So that's why I wasn't sure with the whole line or complement. I just wanted to make sure that I was reading it correctly and how it would come across in the policy.
Not sure I understand what you mean, that if you put the comprehensive plan into the.
When you put the comprehensive plan into the state,
Yes.
it's a computerized system that actually takes all of your needs and assessments and actually, in a loose term, spits out goals for you. So it produces goals for you. So that's why
And you're stuck with those goals, no matter
No,
what the computer says?
you're not. You're not. I mean,
I-
you're going along with those goals, but you can broaden, as we are with like challenging student expectations of learning.
So they
That's one-
complement, so our goals complement?
I can see where you're going with the compliment.
But I think my
I just wanted to make
confusion, the thing I'm trying to clarify is, this is a policy about our board. So
Right.
when it says setting annual goals, those are board goals. And
Okay.
linking board actions, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think that when you plug the comprehensive plan into the computer, it spits out goals for the board.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking about the ones that align with administration.
That is not
so
covered
that's
in this
understood.
policy,
Good, that's fine.
is the, I
My
think
misunderstanding on
is
that.
the distinction, right?
Yeah.
Right,
I think-
okay.
Yeah, I think that could be fine, and I think there's a reality to any time a district, partakes and involved in the comprehensive planning, there is always going to be year-to-year adjustments. There's going to always
Right.
be year-to-year board goals as well. So I think complement
Mm-hmm.
could work there.
Right, so Tony, one thing I wanted to say to you is that Julia's right. In D1, we are adopting and implementing a collaborative, comprehensive planning process. That's a lowercase c.
Yep.
In number 2, it's complement, capital C.
Correct.
And in,
Also- I'm sorry, there's also a capital C that should not be on section 1A, number 3.
okay. So Julia, I'm okay with those words. And Ken, it sounds like you're comfortable with Julia's wording there? Okay. Amy, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, I'm thinking, for some reason, I just feel like this, and it'll come to the full board, but I just think it should be something that was run by Dr. McGuigan, given that she is involved in the comprehensive planning process. So, not that she necessarily has any more authority than anybody else, but I do know that she feels very strongly about wording like that. So I just wanted to,
These are for board goals.
right.
The board.
So where is it in terms of, it's
Yeah.
okay.
And
I
it's
get
not-
feisty. Where is it, in what policy is it that we talk about district goals that are aligned with the comprehensive plan?
Trying to think if there's anything out there. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look if there is anything specific. We just annually, regularly develop goals for each of our departments, each of our schools, that are based on the comprehensive plan. So I'd have to look to see if it's actually in a policy.
All right, so, I mean, that's just for consistency's sake, a question I have, because what the board does should, I would think, complement what the administration is doing, or reinforce or support to some extent, if not a great extent. So I think it would be helpful to just know how those two actions, they're pretty important ones, relate to one another.
So I do want to make sure that all along, I've been reading this particular section as our own board goals. If this is talking about district goals, then I would tell you in number 2, we should be saying that, setting annual district goals, if that's what number 2 is. That's the reason I thought that these goals were all about our own board, which is why I'm surprised to hear you mention Dr. McQuiggan wouldn't normally be involved with the board setting its own goals.
Right.
But if,
So my follow-up question
Yeah, no.
probably elaborated on that, which is is there any policy that speaks to setting district goals and in particular aligning them or complementing so that they complement the comprehensive plan? So if we can, I think I'd be more comfortable if I knew that, and
Let me
I think
say
we-
this, I agree with you, there should be, but I think it's completely irrelevant to this, because, as Susan's pointed out, it's called Board Governance
Board governance,
Standards and
correct.
Code of Conduct. So, yes, we absolutely should be doing district goals in line with it, but not in this policy, it makes no sense.
Yeah, and I feel like, can I jump in there for a minute? As I read it, ensures that effective planning occurs by, so that's this heading now. So we want to make sure we're doing effective planning. So maybe the word isn't complement, it's takes into consideration. So we certainly, if we want to have, as a board, ensure that effective planning occurs, we should take into consideration, setting annual goals that take into consideration our comprehensive plan.
I like that wording.
That's fine with me.
Okay?
okay,
Thank you.
take into consideration so we're going to change that wording, Tony. I know we're giving you a lot here.
I got it.
Number 2, we'll say setting annual goals that take into consideration the comprehensive plan.
Yes.
Okay, and then, Ken, what would you say with number 3 then, given Julia's wording? Linking or taking board actions that, again, take into consideration the comprehensive plan? Or that complement?
I think either. I want to be consistent and go with the takes into consideration.
Okay, then I would change the first word back to linking.
Right.
Linking board that's not a good word.
No, that's not.
Taking. To think about that for a second.
Well, you could link board actions to your board goals, because you've already said that you're setting the goals to take into consideration the comprehensive plan. So you link your actions to your goals, right? It's sort of a sequential process.
Taking board actions that, I'm not sure what the wording should be there.
What if it says linking board actions to annual goals?
'Cause you've already established that.
I'm fine, actually, that's probably more appropriate. We're setting the goals, taking into consideration the comprehensive plan, and then we're taking board actions that, what did you say, that take into, say that again?
Linking board actions to annual goals.
If we took board actions that were linked to our annual goals, we'd be in fabulous shape. I think that's great. Linking board actions to
Annual goals.
annual goals. To annual goals. All right. I mean, I think hopefully the rest of the board, will take a good look at this when they get it for a first read. And, we'll have a conversation.
Down under E,
Oh, wait, hang on. Yes. Go ahead.
there's an extra P.
Yeah.
The
Oh,
yeah,
little
there
P
is.
Oh,
Yep.
for
Yep,
strategic.
yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's all I have.
Okay. Amy, did you have anything on this one?
Yes, I think, again, just Section 2, this only came up after our conversation about 005. The Section 2 says Code of Conduct for School Board Members, and then A says we as members of our local Board of School Directors. So maybe it's appropriate to have 2 different ways of referring to us there, but if not, it's sort of a continuation of being more consistent in how we refer to ourselves in
Yeah,
005.
this will be a perfect example of going through and making the
Okay.
adjustment to board members.
Okay.
So it's consistent throughout each of the policies.
Okay. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is that as I was reading this policy, there were a number of things that spoke to me about something else I had had on my mind for a while, and that is the idea of an orientation program for new board members, because there are certain things that we are charged with doing in complying with this policy. If it exists, much of the language already exists, but certainly if we pass this revised version, where we are supposed to stay current with changing needs and requirements by reviewing educational literature, attending professional development, et cetera, participating in professional development trainings and board retreats, adhering to an established set of rules and procedures for board operations, all of those things. So I wanted to, the question has come up in the public, and I think it begs the question just anyway, is how do we do that? And so I wanted to just propose the idea of something like what Lower Merion has, which is an orientation program for new board members. I printed out a copy of it in case anybody wants to see it. It's not extensive by any means, but it just codifies the fact that there would be a program, and in particular, when you have an election coming up like we do this year, and if there, for some reason, there's going to be new board members, this would be a great opportunity, I think, especially with the new superintendent, to ground us all in a common context for our board work, because we come from different places, experiences, vantage points, and maybe we could start a practice here where we, in complying with 011, have a board orientation program that follows along and includes some of the things that we haven't done, as far as I'm aware of, in the past. And what I would add to this from Lower Merion's list of things, in addition to their visits to schools and information sessions dealing with budget, board policy, buildings and grounds, et cetera, is an H, which would be board protocol, because we are charged here with adhering to an established set of rules and procedures for board operations. Now, those are in policy, but you know, I don't know that we can take for granted that if you're not on the policy committee, you necessarily would be coached in some of those protocols and practices. So just food for thought, because I thought it was relevant to the conversation. I'm interested to know what people would think about putting this in place by, you know, in conjunction maybe with this policy, so that come December, particularly if there are new board members, we have.
I think the orientation is wonderful, and of course, we got a lot of this, but we can even tweak it better. I don't see where it fits into board governance standards and codes of conduct. If anything, I'd see it as a standalone.
Yeah, no, I think it's a standalone too, but I thought this was an appropriate time to talk about it, because some of the things in 011 speak to, well, how will we do that? So I didn't see how it would fit in with 011 in its architecture as it exists. I think it should be a standalone too, but now would be the time maybe to talk about it so that it could be done together.
Are we done talking about 011?
No, we aren't quite. So Amy had mentioned to us she wanted to bring this up, and I saw, particularly when you read page 3 of 6, where number 9 says, we will participate in professional development, training, and board retreats. I thought that that was a nice segue to the rationale for an orientation policy. But I said, let's just mention it and then put it to the side, because I want to make sure to get through 11. I think that, Tony, if you feel comfortable with the changes that we've made, I think that we are finally ready for it to go to a first read to the board and get their feedback on it. And I'm wondering if you feel comfortable with that, Julia, Amy and Julia?
Yes. Yeah.
Great. So again, we're going to put this forth for a first read.
Great.
What I would like to do is just comment, there was a question in the public on page 4 of 6 where someone asked how we evaluate our own performance. And the fact of the matter is, we haven't formally, but I think that in a lot of conversations that we've had this year, and Amy bringing forth this policy with 008, and conversations that we've had as a board in conjunction with our search for a new superintendent, I think that our particular board is one who's aware of the notion of, let's be setting goals and let's talk about how well we're doing. And so I don't imagine that we're going to spell out in this particular policy how we're going to evaluate our performance. I imagine that that is something that our board is intending to do with Ken as our board of 10. So I wanted to answer that question. I don't think that it's appropriate to spell it out in this particular policy, but it would be, I just wanted to make sure to address that, because I think there is a real awareness on our board that some self-reflection is a good thing for a board. So with that, I'd like to put this forth for a first read as well. If Andrea or Andrew, do you have any comments? Okay. And
Just say one thing, I think it's terrific, how we are moving 3 policies forward for a first read and another one for a second read.
we're never letting Dave come back. We get too much done.
I think he'd be jumping for joy to hear the progress we've all made, and
Yeah.
I just think it's great that it's a team effort, and I think at one point, I think our board was frustrated with the slow pace, and now we're going to be throwing so many things at them, they won't know what to do with it, but
Right.
good work.
Yeah. Moving on to agenda item 4, I don't believe that there were any changes to 104. So I'd like to get the board's recommendation to move this forward for a second read. It's largely handled in an administrative regulation. So, Tony, we're good to go with that one as well.
Okay.
And with that, Amy, so back to your policy 008 recommendation. I think it's a good one. I would certainly support bringing this forth as a conversation at the board. I'm not sure what the process is for bringing in a new policy at all, like
Well,
that.
This committee would just craft a new policy and send it to the board as a first read. And
Okay.
then the board would, vote on whether it moves forward.
Okay.
Would you consider putting that on for future consideration list?
Yeah, what I'd like, Julie, I think probably what we should do is talk about this at our next planning meeting. And so let's do that. We'll add this to our list for our March planning meeting, and we'll go from there. And thank you for bringing it forward. Ken, do you have anything more? Do you have anything you want to bring in? Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. I apologize for having to take care of another matter at the same
worries.
time, and maybe we can dovetail board evaluation opportunity with orientation. We could do a high ropes course right after each other, gives each other evaluations. We could do some high ropes and trust activities together.
Super.
I'm having a little fun with that. But no, thank you, and I'm excited to see the pace in which I echo the same comments that Amy made, the pace at which we're going through these, because it can be difficult looking at language in any policy, and it can take time. So
Yeah, that's
thank you.
That's what 2016 looked like. And I spent the whole year telling Julie and Amy, who are new, that it's not normally quite as, we worked hard last year. And Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Robarczyk have worked really hard to help get us to this, where we're working, at a nice pace here. So I feel like we're done. We're going to take some public comment, if we have anyone.
Just one quick question.
Great.
Cindy Spurtle. One quick question that I'd asked before, and I cannot find my notes. In the 005 organization, on page 205, it says that a treasurer and secretary are elected. It still says elected. Are they chosen or elected?
No, that's run by state code. Actually, Mike, why don't you go ahead and answer on that?
Yeah, the board at the meetings elects who it appears on the agenda as a vote, and the board votes on who
It's an
the
election.
secretary will
Okay.
be and who the treasurer will be.
Not an appointment. Thank you.
Okay. All righty. Do we have any other comments? Seeing none, we are adjourned.
Thank you.